Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Feeling Thursday Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are probably going to be working on the same things that we've been working on within our Angel bot work. I wonder if this is working. Not the sound. I'm receiving some reports from team members that they can't enter, but I'm not sure why. I guess we'll find that out later. Hopefully it will clear up or something. But I think we can go into matches. If you would like to join in, this is our NA lounge, and technically that means that if you are anywhere near the Atlantic Ocean, you probably will manage to have good connection if you have sufficiently good internet. This game's a little bit annoying when it stutters, and it does seem to cause some other problems, so this is one of the games where we're not so sure it's a great idea to join in just to see if you have a good connection. You might want to let it pass if you think that it's not going to work out.
Select members. Whoa, check it out! A new challenger is ready to brawl. Select order. Select stage. Get ready for a battle of titans! Round one.
Here we go then. Our most recent work is as noted on our Angel bot, and it has lots of little aspects of it that follow on from the other things we've been discussing in prior streams. They're not necessarily more advanced, particularly than the other things that you train with the bot that we call KyoBot for the time being. But they come up a lot in different ways, so you need to think about them quite often. On a previous stream we spoke about how in order to play this game well, you have to recognize that you can dash and block, or dash and strike, just dash a lot in general. Particularly against opponents who don't want to stay close to you. It's one of your best options to just dash up on people. Jumping is actually slightly slower and way more vulnerable, so while it's not necessarily a bad idea to do the jump serves a different purpose than it does in some other games. This is again mostly because this game isn't really dashing. You are running and stopping when you feel like it's time to stop the run. Therefore, the better you get at running and understanding what you can do when your opponent doesn't check your run, the stronger you'll generally be. It also allows you to force people who are a little bit too far away or a little bit too defensive in a specific retreating way. You can force those people to play footsies. Because all you really want is to get to a spot on the screen where your character has better options than theirs does. And the closer your opponent gets themselves to the corner, the higher the chance that you can do a lot of damage if you really want to. In fact, if you find that you've been doing better with characters who lunge forward for their moves, it's usually related. It's easier to handle characters in this game who do this because you don't actually have to do the dashing. You can advance while still setting up a hitbox for a strike. Our AngelBot development has focused mainly, therefore, on making sure that when you do dash up, you understand what's about to happen. On top of that, those times where you do need to jump become more obvious.
Ready? Go!
But even more fortunately, we find that the bot is effective, the inputs that is, for a lot of characters that we were not thinking we were going to get bots for soon. And while their purpose is a little bit odd, it's still fairly helpful. The amount of change you can achieve to your gaming style for this game by understanding when to run is sufficient that you probably should put in serious effort. And because the game only allows us to save one bot at a time, we do still suggest mostly going through until you're pretty sure you've got all the punishes you need down for the bot we've got. But there is, fortunately, a way back as well. Our most recent tests indicate that while certain characters definitely are not bot-worthy, once you've got the basics of things down, once you can handle the Kyo bot, and particularly Mai, from the same inputs, you can instead use Joe Higashi with the same setup that Angel has, and while he will absolutely not be a good representation of Joe Higashi as a character, it will still allow you to practice the same things.
Select order. Select stage.
So as things are progressing fairly well, we expect to have this bot available by tomorrow for our Disc Guidance segment as it normally is. But there's still possibly the same issue as last time, a few kinks to work through simply because of the number of characters this works for, and some of the inputs being a little finicky, and we want to make sure that we give people the clearest possible instructions for what they need to do so that we don't end up with a bunch of bots out there that are not so easy to understand why they're failing.
Round one. Ready? Go!
What you just saw is another thing that a different bot, well, not necessarily an entirely different bot, but you will learn something additional from the bot that comes up in the same concept. How to dash and throw people. It isn't necessarily obvious that in this game, because of the way you have to do throws, rushing up to your opponent and hitting the throw button doesn't necessarily do anything. If you did not release forward from your dash, you will in fact do your close attack, no matter how close you are. But it's not so easy to just do this correctly because it means you must explicitly either let go and press forward again, which doesn't always work, or press back plus the throw button at the last moment. If you're the player on defense, you similarly need to learn to deal with the dashes, but Angel can help there as well. Specifically Angel, because she does approach often, even though she's not necessarily dashing, you get to deal with the same sort of concept. This is so important, in fact, that a recent change to a different game altogether, specifically Melty Blood, focused almost entirely on that aspect of it. They cared more about the fact that they were changing the movement speed and speed of blocking after dashing than a lot else. So while the bot isn't necessarily the most advanced, it is specifically something that will help you push forward on things that are not familiar to non-KOF players. And that's our focus for now, with KOF bots as a generality. If you're a veteran of this game, you probably didn't need our bots much to begin with. But you could also use them to jump straight to practice mode and make sure you get whatever you need on that side.
Select stage. Nothing will stop this show.
Unfortunately for me, the reports coming in indicate that we are not having everyone having the ability to join the lounge today. And it's not really clear why at all. So we're going to test out some other things.
Ready? Go!
And this lounge might close, but we're not sure yet.
Player one wins.
If it turns out that everything else is working, we'll see if it can work the other way and I can join their lounge.
Round two. Ready? Go!
This has a bit of lag in it too, so it's possible that there's something related.
Player one wins.
Well, the other half of the group does seem to have some
Ready?
fortune in getting into the other lounge, so I'll see what happens about that when we're here in a bit.
Two wins.
Of course, there may be some small break time because this game doesn't generally pick up halfway through when it's doing things like spectating.
Ready? Go!
So off on a hunt for a lounge that works.
くだらぬ試合だ。余興にすら見たんだ。
If it turns out that we're just out of sync in some way, well, obviously, that's going to be very different. Let's see. Off we go. See if we can find it by standard room search, and if not possible, then that will also help to explain things. I should have asked for a more specific explanation of what they meant by couldn't join, but it looks like we're in, so given that we just had matches with the two others, here they are. I will expect them to be arriving shortly. Alright, now it's probably all lined up, and we can probably all just get back to fighting. Some of us have had more time to poke at the various bots than others. But having either bot still allows you to try at least some of the things that we were talking about before. Since each bot we are actually using has a very slightly different style of play, even the ones that don't have extra special point systems will still teach you slightly different things simply because of how their moves are. Our hope is that with the upcoming ones, once we've done enough analysis, particularly over the weekend, we can come up with even more helpful methods for what the Angel Bot and the group of characters that it works with can teach you.
Select members.
But mostly, we're pretty sure that almost all of them are going to push on you to gain some level of offense. Even the ones that technically use the same inputs to become very mobile, like Chris of all people,
For a battle of titans.
the main focus of the fight itself is still to attack. But if you focus in on the dashing aspects of the game that you're about to see, this
Round one.
player matchup in particular is really helpful here. Because these characters tend to have a lot of range. They could fight without actually needing to do the dashing. And having additional range means it's harder to do the full dash to get into a really good position, because when you dash, there's a higher chance your opponent's buttons will check you. One big interesting thing that comes up though is that you can literally run into the recovery of your opponent's normals. And for sometimes this reason, it's not the greatest idea for people to use really far forward ones, as you could literally be whiff punished by someone dashing into you.
Burn to fight. Ready, go.
One of the main important things about the dash and the way to think about it though is just to be able to convert across your other thinking from other games. If you find yourself having trouble understanding how King of Fighters is supposed to work, literally just try applying that more and more. And instead of thinking of it as, okay, there's the dash and then I have to learn things beyond the dash. No, just learn the dash. And then from there, everything you understand from other games you play probably, even if it's 3D games, just start applying all the same principles, but from the perspective of someone who dashes in a lot. At the moment, no one seems to have had any difficulty adapting so far, and it's been quite an interesting thing to watch the speed at which it improves specific mindsets and specific motions. Because if you are thinking about can I dash and realizing it's not a good idea, it's a lot easier to then from there think about all the other things you could / should do instead of trying to think of those things as the way to get in and then failing them and not knowing what else to do. So you can think of that as the core reasoning for why this is the way it is. You dash whenever you can, and when you feel as it's not a good idea to dash, or just that you have a much better option, it's a lot more obvious what you will want to do then, and what your options are for.
Reach for the top. Ready, go.
It's also, quite often because of the weird hitboxes in this game, an oddly effective way to get around problems with people doing their hop attack just instantly as their main concept. Because this game is very, very hitbox dependent. It doesn't go, well, you meant to hit somewhere in front of you, so we'll just have everything in front of you get hit. The characters in this game change their hurt boxes quite a lot. And different options make it easier to move entirely through opposing attacks without having to think about it so much. Depending on your character, because they don't even all dash the same way, you might be able to literally run under people's hop attacks with certain ones. And this tends to balance itself out because the characters who are most capable of just dealing with a jump or a hop are also the ones that are tall. Tall characters tend to hit higher up and resolve the problem by just striking the opponent normally.
Select members. Select order.
Of course, if you wanted to learn all of those things, we fortunately, just pure luck, in much the same way that our Kyobot turned out to be a really good way to get Mai to work, we have learned that our Angelbot is a really good way to get Kula to work. We're not entirely sure whether or not that's because the inputs being used are consistent, and therefore I have to test it on other accounts, more re-entries, see if I can get that same very effective footsies Kula that I got with the main test. But if we do, and it's reproducible outside of me doing it personally, then you can expect to have a bot that doesn't even serve the same purpose as Angelbot per se, but has an entirely different way you can spend your time learning things. Hopefully, similar things are going to happen when we are using Yashiro, Chris, and Shermie, who are all also, for various reasons, relatively effective with the same inputs. But again, this isn't necessarily just about players who are actually doing the dashing. You can improve a lot by understanding how it works simply because your opponent will do it better, and once they do that, you can start to think about how you need to actually defend against. The first order strategy, of course, is hopping, because it's relatively easy to learn for those who have enough experience with this game or just know how instant air moves work. It's not quite the same, but it's enough that you could just practice it and go straight for it after a while. But as our Iori bot was intended to show you how to get quickly through that phase, if you've done so, then you should be able to move on to figuring out what it is that your opponent must do next. So as a defensive player, if your opponent gets shut down every time they hop, they're either going to run away from you, in which case you could probably relax and do nothing, particularly if you have a really good defensive character, and otherwise you're watching for them to dash or do specific specials meant to close space. It's partially why counters and similar things take so long in this game to start up relatively, because in most situations there's a tell before this move actually happens. If it feels like those moves are useless, it's mostly because they're not really for footsies. Therefore, when you have definitely predicted your opponent and put them in a position where you know what they must do next, or you know that they're going to run at you and they have a limited number of strike zones, a limited number of options where running at you is going to be a big payoff, so you just counter that.
Reach for the top. Ready? Go!
This is also a good reason why you notice that the game is allowed to be balanced around projectiles that literally only go across the ground. Now, it's not true that every projectile works like this, but the better ones tend to. And part of the reason for that is simply because that will stop people from dashing all the same. Jumping over a projectile that is basically ground-based is pretty easy. In fact, many characters can do it with just high-profiling moves that don't even require you to actually do anything in particular. You just go over the projectile or the low ground move altogether without any specific requirement other than you press like forward, like kick or something. And these things can similarly be done from places where you dash, making your life even easier. Your opponent can't be sure if they can just use an option like a projectile to get a solution to your approach. Similarly, if you as a defensive character learn to fake your own dash to make your opponent think that you're not just going to defend, it will force them to spend more time considering whether or not they should attack. You don't have to actually mean to attack them. I mean, if you're facing certain types of people, they're just going to know that you were so defensive up until then that they don't really trust that your little jump or dash forward is actually committing to anything. But if you do have good zoning moves, you don't really have to commit. You can literally just dash and do the zoning move because it's not too much different from doing it from the other side of the screen anyway. But simply putting your opponent on the defensive for a little bit longer means that they are not quite as able to focus on tricky ways to get offense. And putting your opponent under mental stress or distracting them is very important. This game always surprises me with the way the invincibility works on its moves. Ooh, that was barely whiffed. That sort of thing that you just saw, just for a moment, to literally hop and land under Antonov's heavy punch. If you were the sort of person who spent a lot of time learning that, to the point where you could more or less do it on demand, then your opponent would have to spend more time thinking about whether or not you were actually going to come at them or not. Because sometimes you might be dashing and then stopping, not because you don't actually intend to attack, but because in that specific moment you realized, oh, that's not the attack, that's not the spacing I want for this attack to actually work.
Select members. Select order. Select stage.
Athena as a character is an interesting application of this same principle because she's one of the few characters in this game that her primary game plan doesn't benefit from dashing at all. You can still do it, and in fact, you generally should still do it, again, just for the same purpose of making your opponent not feel comfortable. But because so much of what Athena wants to do is about keeping the opponent in a very specific spot relative to her, the only time she generally needs to dash is when she knows it will get her to that spot. You don't dash with this character because you want to attack the opponent out of your dash. You're just dashing to get to where you want to be. And of course, the more you can distract or discourage your opponent from actually dashing themselves, the more effective your own zoning is. This is a large part of the reason why beginner Athena players tend to have a lot of problems when they face off with actual, experienced players. They see a zoner with relatively good forward movement, but also very powerful projectiles, and they don't know what to do with the forward movement part. But she is such a tricky character. As soon as you stop thinking about the projectile as a thing that you're supposed to get away from your opponent to do, you just want to be wherever they won't counter it. Whatever that means for that character or for your style, that's what you care about. The move becomes harder to counter when your opponent can't be sure that was the move you wanted to do or were trying to get into position for. And she has lots of other very powerful and frustratingly difficult moves that set up better situations for her. She doesn't really care if any given projectile doesn't hit, if she's spending more time thinking about whether or not you can escape.
Stand your ground. Ready? Go!
Because Isla's moves move her forward, she's not quite so similar to that concept. But she also doesn't benefit a lot from getting in super close either. She can basically afford to just walk. She can also do better than most when it comes to jumping or hop attacks out of the dash, because she's completely misleading when she's doing them. So if you've ever wondered, well, if you care about dashing with this type of character, what are you supposed to do with it? You dash a very small amount after pushing your opponent back with normals. Because the more you can get, this also applies to Chizuru, the more you can get your opponent to think that they have a chance to hit buttons, the better you are at getting to deal with them as a whole. So if you poked them and they've flown away from you, but didn't get knocked down, for example, either because they were blocking or just wasn't one of those moves that you actually do that for, you can spend more of your time dashing in on them just to reset position to a point where you get some whiff punish options. Not a punish this time. But she had a lot of meter, so it's probably fine. Robert is quite a good matchup there, though, because he has a similar option. He just doesn't bother. He just throws the projectile, and the projectile takes up the space. Kyo, on the other hand, has a harder time, but with much less health left on Chizuru's side, it probably isn't going to be overwhelmingly bad. In fact, you see there that when Chizuru does just try to do a move right after hitting someone back, all they have to do is stand still, and the move just basically will almost always not work. So she has to take this option to dash up whenever she can, but you really don't want to dash for very long. It probably should be treated more like a dash from one of those games where you just double tap and the character does the rest of the dash.
久々の大会で緊張でもしてんのか？分身が透けて見えたぜ。
Select members. Select order. Select stage. It's about to be a party up in here!
One of the things that makes Joe most effective in this sort of thing is his Hurricane Upper. Hurricane Upper is not safe, and it doesn't even have good pushback, but it is very fast, and it does not tend to give Joe that much of a hitbox or rather hurtbox that he's extending. You can't hit Joe when he does this move very easily, but Billy can, so it gets a little bit complicated. It also does terrible damage, relatively speaking, but it's still useful to just throw out, almost as if it's a normal, with a very similar concept to the Chizuru just mentioned. If you realize that Hurricane Upper did actually hit your opponent, then chances are you want to dash after it, but you don't want to dash very much. If you were using it to keep them away from you at the last moment, the effectiveness of it is pretty high. And most characters that need to hit buttons to keep Joe away will have to deal with it. And in that sense, he can treat it very similarly to how Fireball characters in other games treat theirs. It's a long normal. The dash up sweep, which only barely reached, I think. It becomes even more important in this matchup because Robert doesn't have to play close and he doesn't have to try a lot of things. But if Joe is trying to get in, the Fireball game from Robert's side becomes much more effective. And as you can see, Robert's Fireball is not like super fast, but compared to many of them in this game, the fluidity of it moving forward once he starts to do it is pretty helpful. I believe the downside of this move is that it actually takes slightly longer to start up than you might expect and does extend a hurt box. You can basically punch or kick his hand, and while you will probably trade and still get hit by the projectile, it does matter. Depending on which move you're using, it might matter a lot. The game pushes it's an attempt to synchronize. Our content in the upcoming weeks will be somewhat limited more than you'd expect because of both the timings related to ECT and time spent preparing for said ECT. East Coast Throwdown in Connecticut is one of the ones that everyone likes to go to, but not everyone can find time. Mostly because of when it ends up getting announced, combined with just general school year stuff. It's a lot easier to go out to EVO, you know, because you don't have the same obligations as much, but there's still usually a good showing. Unfortunately for us, that also means that there will be less showing of various streams during that time. Even more reason to try to make sure that AngelBot is out. As always, as we improve and see the benefits of the bots, we'll probably create other bots meant to handle whatever we come across next. After all, there's no point in throwing these out there if we don't have at least some success ourselves in terms of what they're supposed to teach you paying off in matches. But so far, it's been working pretty well. Prevent people from hopping, and many more of them back off. Get better punishes, and they back off more because they now have to worry about actually losing. Learn to dash correctly, and then they don't even build up enough meter on the way to delete you quickly at the end. This is either going to lead to fighting a lot of much higher level people, or some strategy from the side of people who tend to avoid losing more so than trying to win that I haven't seen yet. And of course, once I do see it, from whichever character, I'll be sure to do my best to create a bot of some character to do the job of teaching how to counter it. Or just general improvement, but the ones that we have right now seem to be so good at handling general improvements so far that we're not necessarily expecting that to be required. Ooh, that was unlucky. For various reasons, it's actually quite hard to confirm out of Kyo's down forward heavy kick on the second hit. And so far I haven't been able to figure out exactly why it is. But if you are trying to do it normally, just go for super because it's not as if much else works.
Select members. Select order.
As I believe I previously noted, until my opponents have a specific skill, playing Mary versus Joe is just kind of unfair.
Get ready for a battle of titans.
So, let's put those two as far apart as possible and see what we get. The problem is that Joe does relatively well handle Iori to the point where I don't like this matchup personally. Iori's requirement is to whiff punish with a specific thing that is quite unsafe to do as a generality, and on top of that, when you do get this done, when you do get it right, your reward is relatively small. Fortunately, Iori does play defense pretty well in this matchup. Not terribly well, but well enough. This has to do with the speed at which his normals start up and create hitboxes close to his own body. I mean, his normals are pretty fast in general, but the usefulness of them is that when you are particularly close to Yuri, you have to worry a lot more and block for a lot longer. This matchup also isn't great, but again, understanding the specific aspects of the two characters tends to make it a little bit easier. Gisa's a lot better at staying out of Kukri's counterattack range than he is at specifically attacking Kukri. Is that actually standing up in time? No. And now we are to what I consider the probably most fair matchup out of them all. King has options to get around all of Gisa's counters, but once she does get hit, the position is usually reversed quite heavily. And as for Mary, this is just a reaction game, at least as far as I've ever played it. And on the other side is basically the same. But this also has a lot to do with how defensively my opponent is playing at any given time. So if I decide not to go in, it's usually a little bit easier.
Select member. Select order. Select stage. Nothing will stop this show.
I think this is our last on-stream match of the night. Although the lounge is likely to stay open for quite a bit longer.
Round one. Ready? Go!
One of the final things that the bots will probably help you learn relate directly to getting the quick combos off your crouching light kick that you will need once you start to roll at the right timings. As good as the evasive roll is, it is vulnerable at the end, and you are right next to your opponent, which means that if you don't hit the button first, it's likely they're going to do something. Having good control over that combo and when you finish it or don't finish it is super important. It's also the one you use in that situation just now where you do an unexpected cross-up because there's not really a lot of other things you can do there. Not consistently anyway. Yep, definitely gonna be last. You can join us probably on Saturday, but not necessarily. We're not ready to guarantee the Dead or Alive 60 times Battle Lounge, but we are ready to guarantee at least one of our Do Not Falter DNF Duel Sunday lounges. Of course, we will also be having next week Monday our Mishmashing Battle Lounge in Street Fighter V. And that's all I can guarantee you. Beyond that, I can't be sure what will happen next week or the week after that in terms of content. You're just gonna have to watch our Twitter @2_MK_FGC. Around the usual stream time, 7:30 Eastern or 7:30 Central European, I believe. In case those of you missed the news, there is a new Street Fighter 6 showcase. So, you know, toss that into whatever search engine you prefer. You can expect Angelbot and probably like 4 others off the same inputs to be released this Sunday, as they often are. Around the same time, just before the DNF Duel stream, probably. Last time we didn't quite make it, and it ended up getting released during the stream. It might happen again, we don't know. But if it is, you'll find the bot at 2-mk.org along with all the others, and hopefully be able to put it to use to level up your KOF game. That brings us to the end of our stream for tonight. This has been Rillian, 142MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.